In 1925, Britain made a decision that would destroy millions of jobs, trigger the largest strike in its history, deepen economic suffering, and accelerate the decline of the world's greatest empire. The strange part, it was completely voluntary. No invasion, no natural disaster, no financial collapse. The British government did it to itself. At the centre of this story was a simple idea. An idea that sounded responsible, an idea that sounded patriotic, an idea supported by bankers, politicians, newspapers, and some of the most powerful men in the world. They believed restoring Britain's currency would restore Britain's greatness. Instead, it nearly broke the country. This is the story of how Britain sacrificed its workers, its industries, and ultimately its future in order to defend a number that existed largely in the minds of policymakers. A number that became more important than reality itself, because sometimes the most dangerous economic disasters are not caused by reckless spending. They're caused by leaders desperately trying to recreate a world that no longer exists. And in Britain's case, that obsession would become one of the greatest economic mistakes in modern history. November 11, 1918, the guns finally fell silent. Across Britain, church bells rang, crowds filled the streets, and celebrations erupted from London to Liverpool. The First World War was over. Britain had emerged victorious. At least that was the public perception. On paper, the British Empire appeared stronger than ever. It stretched across a quarter of the globe. Its navy remained dominant. London was still viewed as the financial centre of the world. But beneath the celebrations lay a frightening reality. Britain had won the war and bankrupted itself in the process. The government had spent money on a scale previously unimaginable. To finance the war effort, Britain sold overseas assets accumulated over generations. When those assets ran out, it borrowed heavily. By 1918, the national debt had exploded. The world's greatest creditor had become one of its largest debtors. The transformation was historic. Before the war, Britain financed the world. After the war, Britain owed the world, and that distinction would change everything. Most countries emerging from catastrophe focus on adapting. Britain focused on going backwards. The political establishment became obsessed with one goal: returning to the gold standard. To modern audiences, the idea may seem strange. But before World War I, gold was the foundation of the global financial system. Currencies were tied directly to gold reserves. The British pound wasn't just money. It was a symbol of trust, a symbol of empire, a symbol of British supremacy. The war had shattered that system. Inflation surged, the pound weakened, and for many members of Britain's elite, this felt less like an economic adjustment and more like a national humiliation. They believed restoring the old exchange rate would restore Britain's former glory. What they failed to recognize was that the world had fundamentally changed. America was rising, British industry was weakening. The economic conditions that once supported the old system no longer existed. Yet policymakers refused to accept reality. They became determined to force reality to fit their nostalgia, and that decision would prove disastrous. In 1924, Winston Churchill became Chancellor of the Exchequer. Today, Churchill is remembered as Britain's wartime hero. But in the mid-1920s, he faced a very different challenge. He was asked to decide the future of Britain's economy. One man warned him not to proceed. His name was John Maynard Keynes. Keynes argued that Britain was attempting the impossible. The pound was overvalued. Forcing it back to its old level would make British exports dramatically more expensive. Factories would suffer, workers would suffer. Entire industries would suffer. Keynes predicted wage cuts, mass unemployment, industrial unrest, economic stagnation. His warning was crystal clear. But Churchill chose to listen to the financial establishment. In April 1925, Britain officially returned to the gold standard at the pre-war exchange rate. The announcement was celebrated, bankers applauded. Newspapers praised the decision, politicians declared victory. Yet the celebration masked a devastating truth. The costs would not be paid by bankers, they would be paid by workers. The consequences appeared almost immediately. British exports became more expensive. Foreign customers turned elsewhere, orders disappeared. Factories slowed, mines struggled, shipyards emptied. To survive, businesses looked for ways to cut costs. And the largest cost was labor. Workers were asked to accept lower wages. Longer hours, harder conditions. The mining industry became ground zero. Coal miners faced wage reductions reaching 25%. For communities already living near poverty, the proposal was devastating. The miners responded with a simple slogan: not a penny off the pay. Not a minute on the day. What began as an economic policy was rapidly becoming a national confrontation. In May 1926, Britain came to a standstill. Trains stopped, factories stopped, ports stopped, millions of workers walked out. The general strike had begun. For 9 days, the nation was paralysed. Many feared revolution, others feared civil war. The government ultimately prevailed. The strike collapsed. The miners were eventually forced back to work under worse conditions than before. From the perspective of policymakers, victory had been achieved. The gold standard survived, the pound remained strong. But something crucial had been overlooked. The economy remained weak, the suffering continued. And the promised prosperity never arrived. Then came 1929, the Great Depression. Global trade collapsed, financial panic spread across Europe. Investors began withdrawing gold from Britain, confidence evaporated. The Bank of England struggled to defend the pound, desperate measures followed. Spending cuts, tax increases, wage reductions. Even unemployment benefits were slashed. The government sacrificed more and more in an effort to save the system, yet the pressure continued. By September 1931, reality could no longer be ignored. Britain abandoned the gold standard, the pound fell sharply. And then something remarkable happened. The catastrophe everyone feared never arrived. Instead, the economy began to recover. Exports improved, interest rates fell, investment returned, growth resumed. The policy that had caused years of suffering disappeared almost overnight. The tragedy wasn't simply that Britain made a mistake. Every country makes mistakes. The tragedy was how long Britain refused to admit it. For years, policymakers sacrificed jobs, wages, industries, and social stability in pursuit of a symbol. They confused national prestige with economic reality. They believed a strong currency automatically meant a strong country. History proved otherwise. The lesson remains relevant today. Nations do not become prosperous because their financial statistics look impressive. They become prosperous when their people can work, produce, innovate, and build. When governments forget that distinction, economic policy stops serving society. And society begins serving economic policy. Britain learned that lesson the hard way, at enormous cost, and by the time the mistake was finally corrected, an empire had already begun its decline. If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe to Cinematic History Tales and join us for more stories where economics, politics, and history collide. Because sometimes the decisions that shape the world are not made on battlefields. They're made in boardrooms, treasury offices, and central banks. And their consequences can last for generations.